I mean, she hadn't seen her family for years and years. And God told her, yeah, go find your family. So she started the hike. And as she's approaching the village, she hears sounds of a party. She arrives. And what had happened? Her brother had been told by the Holy Spirit, prepare a party. There's going to be an unexpected visitor.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Inspired with Simon Gilbo. I'm very excited this week because we've got a real character. Some would call her a nutter. She's eccentric, she's fun, she's got an extraordinary story across many different nations. Her name is Alli Mbabazi Blair. Welcome, Alli.
Thank you, sir.
It's so really good to have you. It really is. So why do I say Mbabazi? For those of you, which is just about all of you that don't speak Kirundi, Alli was given the name Mbabazi. Very few white people from the outside are given local names, but she was given the name Mbabazi, which means compassion. And that is absolutely who she is. So I don't know whether we'll experience it live on air today, but often as she's talking, she's telling stories, she'll just start crying because she is very moved by people's brokenness, I suppose. And yeah, a very, very dear friend. So in Burundi, where we journeyed for 20 years together, she used to come around every Tuesday night. She was our children's auntie or granny. You're more of a granny, aren't you, Alli?
Well, at this stage of my career, I guess I've got to be a granny.
So how many years young are you?
I'm only 67.
Right. And
half the age of Abraham and Moses and all those guys.
Well, Alli in Burundi, yeah, she was just, our kids absolutely still do love her. And yet, what's exciting is at age 67, just a few months ago, she packed her 2 suitcases and flew to Cambodia to go and live up in the North Cambodia in the jungle. And we're going to hear all about how you got to that point, Alli. But incidentally, you got called Mbabazi. As I said, very few white people got given local names. I got given a local name too, and mine was Hakigenda, so Simon Hakigenda. And whereas yours is very sort of nice and kind, meaning compassion, mine, Hakigenda, means it's a disaster or nothing works. So thanks a lot, folks. That's what I got named for. Hello, it's a disaster. Nice to meet you. And some people would just come up to me and say, no, you can't have that name. That's terrible. That's speaking bad stuff over you. Anyway, it didn't go too wrong so far. Anyway, let's get into the meat proper. So, Alli, we go back a long way, 23, 24 years. Let's go back. So, where were you born? Give us a bit of early years stories.
Yeah, well, I popped out actually in England of Canadian parents. So my whole childhood was between Canada and England. And when we were in England, we were fed with stories of Canada. And when I say Canada, I mean the dissident part, basically, Quebec. So Quebec is 1% Anglophone, and so I was part of that, but of course grew up hearing French all around. My dad, very sociable, he's the one who made us go to church, so that was the beginning of just beginning to know that there was a God out there, at least. And Mum was a kind of, I think she was the one who gave herself the name of Closet Radical, and age 85 published a book called Cool Nudes, which says it all about her. She's a musician and artist.
Explains so much of what you're like now, Alli. And by the way, listeners, if we're a bit rude to each other, that's just our banter. Please don't think I'm being insensitive to Alli, and I'm sure she'll be back to me. It's just that we go back a long way, and it comes very natural. But that does explain a lot. I did not know that, you nutter.
No, well, the thing that I resent is that I was in Burundi when she published this thing. Who am I supposed to show it to? I mean, if it was when I was at school, it would have been, imagine the points I would have
very
got.
Culturally sensitive, yes. Instantly, I can hear cockerels in the background and people talking. The fact is that we couldn't even try, could we, in this interview to sort of do it. There's no time of day as you're right there in northern Cambodia with various animals in the searing heat. How hot is it today?
37, only 37 today.
Oh dear. But it's good that we can picture you. Can you see any animals from where you are right now?
Oh, yes. Actually, I'd just like you to know that on every 4th Saturday, they have cockfights, which are quite illegal. So a couple of months ago, I was friends and I were waiting for the local bus, waiting, which the guy had promised would go at 8. And we waited. And finally, at 9 o'clock, we, by the scruff of the neck, we grabbed the guy. His cockerel was winning and he wasn't going to leave. So that, yeah, that's just totally classic around here.
Oh dear. Well,
So
okay.
water buffaloes go by about 25 to 7 in the morning, chunkle, chunkle. It's just such a, so there's all the domestic animals you can imagine and more. Yeah.
And the fans whirring in the background there, which you absolutely need. I couldn't put you through switching off for an hour. You'd be, just clothes would have changed colour from sweat. I remember getting out the shower and already getting sweaty just in the motion of drying myself out. Oh dear. It's, as I said, rather you than me. Anyway, we're getting seriously distracted. We've got so many stories we want to share. So let's move on through teens. Any dramatic stuff? What sort of pushed you towards your life course and direction?
Well, I just want to say we grew up with storytelling. So I think I would say my first really powerful experience of God was from a book that I'm sure many of you have read called The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And it was where Aslan is on the altar being killed, actually, to take the place of Edmund. And I just had this, for any of you who've had a kind of a crazy spiritual experience, I'm as I'm speaking, my hands are just kind of trying to explain what happened, but my whole body and mind and spirit were just transported. And at the time, I was just a baby. I mean, I didn't know anything about Jesus and the Spirit and resurrection, but God really gave me that powerful thing. And so that was a beginning. And I was one of these people who goes to, we had to go to church, didn't really like it, never found any life there. But then I had one friend, James Jones, who I think he's a bishop somewhere or other now, who he was the first person who I met who really had a living faith. And in fact, the first time he prayed with me, my hair stood on end because I thought there were ghosts in the room because I'd never experienced such a thing. And thanks to his intervention, I came through into Jesus. Then I quite soon after left. That was in England, and a few minutes later went to university, where I'm afraid I did the kind of classic. At least I went quite off the rails, but always remembering I'd had this powerful experience where I'd questioned God, and suddenly he just said, "You know what? I am," and all my arguments just melted into the fact that he was. And I had this picture of someone filling up my darkness with liquid light, and after, I realized that was Jesus just cleaning me out, giving me a fresh start, which is a good point to always come back to when you don't feel quite so strong in your faith.
And were you always destined, do you think? Clearly you're not conventional. Were you always destined to take an unusual path, do you think? Did you ever go into a normal job for a bit at least?
I don't remember very many normal jobs. I have to confess that I'm someone I really don't like commitment. Now that's a really big confession. And God has used that. But so I never like to say, okay, I'll sign on the dotted line and do something for a long time, which meant that I've done a lot of things. But God kind of caught me at my own game, and he'll make me sign on for 3 minutes and then turn it into 8 years. Like I went to the Thai-Cambodian border I signed on for 3 months. I said, oh, what if I don't like it? Anyway, I ended up staying 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us about that part of your journey.
Yeah, so I think you probably have all heard of the Cambodian genocide. And so there were millions of Cambodians who left the country. Thousands had died. I can't remember the figures. So the border ended up being the Thai-Cambodian border was filled with people who were full of, how do I say, the agony of having survived a genocide, having watched their loved ones not survive. And so the border was just a whole series of camps. And I started off working in a camp called Khao Idang. And there I met one morning the elders of the church. The church was actually a bamboo church, and it was the biggest Cambodian church in the world at the time. And the elders met me at the gate and said, oh, there's this boy, you've got to adopt him. So I'm thinking, actually, that wasn't really in my plans. So they took me to meet this little boy called Sato, who became a very important person in my story. And he ended up coming to England. I was able to help him get to England, and he got an education there. and married a Cambodian, had 2 children. And I'm telling you the story because the youngest child he called Alison Blair, which was my name. And when I found that out, I just totally collapsed in tears. And actually, we kind of lost connection and reconnected. By the time we reconnected, a year later, she got cancer and died. She had a brain tumor. So it was quite a dramatic, intense period. And she actually died while I was in Cambodia. I'd come to visit her. And suddenly COVID struck. I'm stuck on the edge of the forest. The borders are all closed. No planes out. No way to go and visit the little one I'd come all the way to see. And yeah, but actually God used that to bring me to work with a minority tribe in the far northeast, a minority group called the Kavet. So what I'm doing now is I'm learning the Kavet language, and I'm hoping to be able to just encourage in the process of the translation of the Bible. Yeah.
Wow.
Sorry, that was a long sentence.
No, it's good. And again, I'm just picturing, we'll have all sorts of ages of listeners, but, most people, I don't think most people's highest aspiration is to arrive safely at death, but most people that follow a more conventional route, are quite looking forward to retiring and maybe either playing golf or bridge or tending the garden. There's nothing wrong with those things, but I love the fact that you are at retirement age, but you are just embracing this whole new adventure, and I really want to be like you. So I want people to challenge me when I'm 67. Come on, Simon, why not take on a whole new country, a whole new adventure? And so that's a real challenge and honestly an inspiration, Alli. It's really is.
Honestly, I absolutely love it. I mean, God's given me a huge love for the people, for the place, I won't say the food, but for the food. And it's also a place where there's obviously, if you like talking about Jesus, there's a lot of occasions to do it.
Yeah. So you had 13-ish years with the Cambodia connection. Before we just move on to why you left, we had all sorts of pets in Burundi, crazy pets. There were crocodiles down the road that we could go and play with, literally. We could go and shake their tail, get in a cage with them, snakes and all sorts. You did have one chunky snake, didn't you? Tell us a bit about that one.
Yeah, well, one day I was just going to have my omelette in a little bamboo hut by Khao Dang, actually, just across the road from Khao Dang, any guys who know it. And there in the corner, it's just a tiny place. It has like 3 bamboo tables. And there's this sack in the corner. I said, okay, so what's this? And they said, oh, well, we've got this bonus of a whole bunch of boa constrictor steaks coming up. I said, no way. So I bargained, bought the thing for, I think it was 500 baht.
Which is?
And, honestly, I don't remember, Simon. You'll have to do the maths.
Like a $5 or something?
Oh, no, it was a bit more than that. Seriously. Anyway, it was a serious contribution to a snake's life, I felt. So I got my guys to build him a big cage, because they like big cages, because they're big. It was 4 meters long, and he was absolutely gorgeous. And I don't know if you know this, but this is really important information to people. A boa constrictor, when he's happy, his pattern, he has like diamonds, they're kind of relaxed. But when he's mad or upset, they go into tight lines, sharp lines. So next time you're hanging out with a boa constrictor, you want to know what his mood is. So I called him Tiglath-Pileser, the squeezer. And we had a very happy relationship. But then people kept poking him through the cage. So I decided, by the way, it's biblical. So anyways, I felt sorry for him because people would poke him when I wasn't there. And so I decided to let him go ceremonially. So we took him to a national park, put a pink ribbon around his neck, and blessed his departure to the forest.
Oh, and he was duly someone's state the next morning, do you think, or what?
No, he lived happily ever after.
Okay, yeah, we choose to believe that. Wonderful. So goodbye, Cambodia, and hello, Rwanda. Did you literally fly straight across? This is 1994 now, isn't it?
Yeah. So I flew, it's not exactly straight enough, hung a left, and got to the airport in Kampala, where I'd been told somebody would pick me up and take me to Kigali. Nobody there, so finally I hitched a ride in a taxi. I just have to say, my favorite thing about the taxi ride was every time I asked the driver, what kind of bird is that? He said, it's a crow. And I'm not the brightest in the universe, but I did notice that they were not anyway, it was really funny. So I'm getting closer and closer to the Rwandan border, and I'm knowing that there's just been a genocide, and it's getting tense.
I even love it the way you just say, you hitched a ride in a taxi because no one showed up. Because people, you say Kampala, no one, unless you've been to Africa, would understand it. So Kampala is the capital of Uganda, and Rwanda, that's probably a 7-hour, in those days, bad road, 8-9 hour ride to the border. So you just cadged a quick taxi ride to the border. Carry on.
The next day, actually. And and then as I crossed the border, bracing myself for the first bodies and everything that I was imagining, I saw these little tiny people in rags, barefoot, coming out from behind trees and waving at me and saying "Komera," which means, also in Kirundi, it means courage. And I completely fell to pieces, saying, these little people have survived a genocide. They're seeing me arriving with all my resources, and they're saying, be brave, courage. So what a way to start. It was. So I spent 3.5 years actually in Rwanda, and saw things I had hoped never to see. But as God had promised, each time I came to a place where I had to do something in a million years I knew I couldn't, he just was beside me. So we lived a lot of things together there.
And that was with World Vision, wasn't it? And with children. And I remember you telling one time about these children sort of confessing to adultery, which just didn't make sense at all.
Yeah, so I was based in the south in a town called Gikongoro, and where sort of cleared out the school, cleared the bodies. I didn't do it myself, but cleared up the bodies and started taking in kids who were running around the hills because nobody knew who had a living relative or not. Parents didn't know if they'd survived. Did they have any kids alive? Kids didn't know if their parents. So my job was to look after the kids and then try and find a living relative. And one day a couple of the kids were confessing adultery. We're thinking, excuse me, but when you're 10 years old, this doesn't seem... Anyway, it's just so awful. On top of everything they'd been through, it turned out that somebody I had hired, was abusing the boys. And we eventually got him locked up, which was quite hard to do. And the next day, because he had an uncle in power, the next day he was out. Yeah, so just, layer of horror upon horror, if you could imagine such a thing.
Yeah, and it makes you so angry, doesn't it? Those injustices that are just so commonplace, and impunity and people getting away with stuff. Anyways.
I tell you, that is the thing that tests your faith more than anything almost, is just having to face that kind, and having to trust God. Not that you sit there and do nothing, but trusting that God is going to bring. I mean, one of the verses that I took with me to Africa was, God is close to the brokenhearted. And if you think about it, if you want to hang out with God, hang out with the brokenhearted, because he is right there.
Yeah.
So just we can trust him in everything, and I just saw some amazing redemptive stories.
Yeah. So I know you were meant to. It was another one of those in inverted commas 3-month things, like it had been in Cambodia. You meant to come just at 3 months to Rwanda and then head back to Cambodia, but those 3 months became 3 years, and then Rwanda's loss was Burundi and my gain. So why did you come to Burundi?
Yeah, so I won't say I finished, but I did leave Rwanda and ended up going back to. Wait a minute, I got my countries right here. So I went back to Cambodia. I got a job which was for 6 months, living in an isolated village. My water was a treadle pump well. I lived in a classic little house on stilts, flooded twice a year. So part of the time I was going around by boat, part of the time I was going. Anyway, all of a sudden there's a coup d'etat. And all of a sudden, so the most poignant thing of all was that every Cambodian immediately switched back to 75, which was when the genocide had started, and all the films in their wounded beings were shot up to the surface, and they were just bracing themselves, and the trauma came back. And I was asked to take over the organization. I was with actually World Concern, and because my boss was an American, he had to leave, had to evacuate. So I had I don't know how many hour, like a 6-hour motorbike journey to get to the capital. And so I was just, the reason I'm telling you this is that halfway there, suddenly I just heard a really clear voice from God saying, don't be afraid until you need to be afraid. So as you know, someone sticks a gun to your head. That's a really smart time to be afraid. But it's not smart to be afraid when you're just imagining stuff that 9 times out of 10 won't happen. And the devil loves to do that to us.
Yeah.
It's going to be like this. There's going to be bodies everywhere. You're probably going to get... No, don't do it. So that was actually a really important...
Yes.
Dodging a pig in a puddle.
That applies to anywhere in the world, doesn't it? I mean, so many people live
Exactly.
shackled by fear, and there's no point.
Yeah. So yes, so I just really recommend that little revelation to all of us. Yeah, as you said, just it works in a lot of different. It served me well when I came back to Burundi. So yeah, so I was there, and then I ended up being evacuated, medevaced out, because I'd gone up to the north to visit the tribal area, and had foolishly accepted an offer by a village chief. At that time, they didn't actually wear very much, and they literally, bows and arrows. And so I partook of a rather fiery brew, and then of a wild pig, which actually was putrid. And I got so ill. I mean, anyway, long story, but ended up being evacuated and ended up back in England. As I was coming through, it was actually a meningeal virus that I had. As I was coming out of that, I get a phone call from Burundi. Well, where are you? We need you. We've got 21,000 orphans in the hills, kids. So I said, well, if you'll take us a semi-lucid creature, I'll come. So yeah, so that was in 1998, March the 4th, I arrived in Burundi. Praise God.
So you're March the 4th, 1998. I'm January the 20th, 1999. I meet you and think, who is this lady? But, everyone, I remember bringing up my Scripture Union team and we were broke. We had no money, and you let us all crash in your house. I set up my tent in your living room as my mosquito net. And I remember I was on my motorbike one time and riding back to the capital. I didn't have enough petrol, and you came back by an hour later, and we had a discussion. I said, I'll take my chances, you carry on. And it was they were crazy days, because that was the most dangerous road in the world. We too, white people in the country, we were the two most likely people to get killed, because, you actually worked for World Vision. You were meant to be sensible. You even had rules about being sensible, but you disobeyed them all flagrantly, and always drove, scooping up half-dead people on the road, all that sort of stuff. And I actually didn't have any of those rules. Such fond memories in general. So very early days, you told me about this guy called Freddie, Uize Freddie, and we end up having quite a journey. So tell us a bit about him.
Yeah, well, so I used to work in 4 provinces, and the most northern province was Kayanza, which bordered on Rwanda. And I used to, see people on the street, and one day there was this boy who I kept seeing, and every time I saw him, I just wanted to run, because he was covering his face. But the hand that he was holding the hood across his face with was so badly damaged, I thought. And even the tiny bit you could see that was showing was just horribly damaged. Anyway, so I used to give him money so that I confess this, honestly, that he would just go away. And then very soon I felt the Lord saying, excuse me, but you can't do that. He's one of my people, and I want you to get to know him. So I started to get to know him. And I was going to say I started to talk to him, but it's really hard to talk to someone. He actually had no mouth. He'd fallen in a fire having an epileptic fit when he was about 7, and his jaw had broken open, and he frankly looked like a monster, and people thought he was a monster, except he covered his mouth, he covered his face as much as he could. And I was able to I knew someone who was a plastic surgeon, and started the process of finding out if he could get surgery and And it turned out that this plastic surgeon, a Russian called Yuri, he agreed to do it. I went to the village because I had to get permission from Freddie's dad. So up into the hills and around the corners, and I arrived, and there is Freddie, sitting on a little mud stump, and beside him was a perfect clay model of a radio, a walkie-talkie that he'd just made out of. This guy is extraordinary. He's not just a guy with a blown out face. He's got a mind. Anyway, the more I got to know him, the more I find he has an extraordinary mind. So he was able to have multiple surgeries in Rwanda, in Kigali, and I can't remember exactly at what point, but thank God Simon agreed to take, in French we say, prendre le relais. He sort of took over because it was getting a little bit financially tricky.
Well, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because I remember he'd had umpteen massive long operations in Rwanda, and then Yuri had said that his body is traumatized. He was in a coma, and if he survives this, then come back in 10 years so his body could recover. And then 10 years later, you talked about him repeatedly, and then one day I said, why don't you track him down and see how he's getting on? And so we drove up into the bush. And it wasn't actually that hard to find, was it? Because you just say, where's the melted face guy? And that initial surgery had done major reconstructions, but frankly, he still looked absolutely awful. I mean, it was such a long way to go with that stump of a hand that, needed separating, and that jaw that didn't exist and dribbling everywhere. And we tracked him down in the bush. Where's the melted face guy? He shows up. We're talking about him like he's a project, really. In English, and suddenly he pipes up in English. It's like his fourth language. He'd self-taught in the bush, and again we both thought, oh my goodness, this guy is special. And so I managed to get funding. Flew him twice to Kenya. He had a 17-hour operation, a 13-hour operation, a 15-hour operation. This is over a couple of years, a total of 100 hours of surgery, and each time major improvements. And but then didn't we? I mean, we were able to sponsor him through studies. He got a distinction in his degree. He's like a mini celebrity in the area. And then the unbelievable, because surely no one would ever actually want to be with him. But tell us about what happened next.
So actually, the surgeon had said, if he finds a girlfriend, send him back, and we'll do the final tweaks. Anyway, at medical school, he links up. Both of them fall in love. And with Florid, which is Florida, a lovely, amazing girl who just, it's the classic ugly prince, except it's supposed to be, handsome prince, ugly prince. Anyway, the frog.
Ugly duckling, whatever. Yeah.
Frog, and she didn't see a frog, she just saw a handsome prince. And I bless her for that. They got married, and I remember an amazing conversation. They had the most beautiful baby you've ever seen. And at the dedication of the baby, I remember Freddie says to me, oh yeah, you see that guy there? Years ago, I said to him, let's learn the French dictionary together. So these two go and sit in the hills together and learn French dictionary vocabulary.
Nuts, yeah.
Yeah, so an amazing, brave boy who overcame things that we can't even imagine.
And he's now had a second child, and we gave him money to start a business in a pharmacy. Actually, because of the corruption, he wouldn't bribe. He's a very righteous guy, and so that's part of the mess of ongoing living. But if I have to think of a story of the gospel, and your name, Babazi, compassion. Compassion is at the heart of the Christian faith. That's what Jesus called us to. I think of the most hopeless, the ugliest duckling in Burundi, and he is such a redemptive story. Absolutely. Just love it. It warms my heart. Now, you started all sorts of initiatives, but the one that really sticks to mind, which is certainly your latter sort of decade, wasn't it, was Bravo Ministries. But actually, even that came out of working with child soldier demobilization, and prostitutes, getting them out of those two, less than the best trades. All those young boys had raped and killed, and you managed to get them sort of reintegrated as mechanics in different garages. And the girls, obviously, no one wants to be a prostitute, do they? But tell us about, I love the story of Ange, French for angel. Fabulous.
Oh, well, most of our the ladies that we chose were really at the bottom of the line. And I say bottom of the line, they would get like, how much is 3,000 francs?
Yeah, like
for
a quid.
Like a quid. And that is without using a condom, because the client would pay more for a condom. So of course, anyway, there was Ange was one of our unusual girls who'd been. Her customers were UN, so they were high up the scale, and she was an extraordinary lady. She was really a lady of dignity. She came to us, and of course laden with makeup and fancy clothes, the usual stuff. And she just, every morning from 8 to 9, we would always share the gospel. And I mean share, we would just share stories and sing and dance, whatever our mood was. And as the days went by, the makeup was less heavy. And one day she just said, you know what? I want to receive Jesus, and I want to spend a weekend praying, because I want to go and tell my family that my life is completely transformed. And I don't even know, I mean, she hadn't seen her family for years and years. And so we gave her permission to. It was in a pretty rough quarter where we worked, but so she spent a weekend. She brought her bag of clothes. That was her business clothes, and she burned them. And God told her, "Yeah, go find your family." So she started the hike. We gave her time off. Started the hike up into the hills, and as she's approaching the village, she hears sounds of a party. Well, fine. And of course, you know how it echoes. Anyone who's been in Rwanda or Burundi, it's an extraordinary thing. It's like you see a film of the future. You look across the hills and you can see a community far off, and you can hear things across the valley. Anyway, she hears music. She arrives, and what had happened? Her brother had been told by the Holy Spirit, prepare a party. There's going to be an unexpected visitor. Wow. Just do it. They did it. And many of the family members had been converted in the meantime, while God had been working in her. So here she arrives in a party prepared with, they're not that wealthy, and it was prepared for her. So of course it was incredibly moving. Everybody just cracks up with joy, hug each other, swap stories, encourage each other about the power of God. And so it was just, that has cheered so many people. And one thing I particularly like about it is sometimes we hesitate and we think, oh, what will they think about our change? And God, he's actually working both sides of the fence, guys. It was just that so powerfully illustrates that he's on the job. Don't hesitate, don't fear.
That is the most clear sort of, modern day version story I know of Luke 15, the parable of the lost son, in this case, the lost daughter, isn't it? Back from the dead. She was dead. I mean, they'd long presumed she was dead, and they disowned her because of her career choice. And, you wouldn't last long in that line of work. So truly back from the dead. Wonderful. Folks, I'd love it if you're enjoying these podcasts and getting inspired. That's the whole purpose of it. If you could spread the word, give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. And if you want to be in touch with me, you can do so on simongilbo.com or any of the social media platforms. All right, let's get back to the podcast. So I'm just thinking, you did a few forays into the Congo. Any interesting tales from that time?
I got involved with a project called Burundi Leadership Training Program, so the war was still rather raging, and it was basically a peace. It was to bring the alienated sides together, get them to sit down together. And if anyone's ever been in a conflict zone, that's totally impossible, because if A hears that B is going to even be anywhere near, he's not going to show up. So it was a very brilliant program prepared by a guy called Howard Walpe, who was an ambassador who knew all the heads of state in Africa. He was based at the Woodrow Wilson International Center in the States. Anyway, so
this is actually quite a pucker job for you. This is you being a bit more sensible.
I was actually earning money. Yeah, well, not huge. Anyway, so it was a real proper job. I was a real grown-up. And actually, there's a story related to that. Maybe if I'm allowed to tell it after. So we brought together people, and at the beginning, half the people we were dealing with had armed guards with them because they were so unpopular, to put it mildly, which didn't lend itself to a very relaxed exchange. But gradually we managed to persuade with the beer, actually get the armed guards out of the room so that we could actually exchange with a slightly more relaxed atmosphere. And some amazing things happened. And it was quite successful. I could tell a billion stories, but so that we were asked actually to go to Congo and work with some of the leaders there. You might look at the history of Congo since and think, oh my goodness, we don't see very many signs, but there was some powerful work done in that period. A lot of it a little bit secret. In fact, one day it was quite funny because we were working with all the army. So we had the army chief of staff and we had the head of the armed resistance groups and everybody. And we all drove up to Gitega, and the media saw and they said, oh my goodness, there's going to be a coup d'etat. We've got all this thing happening. People didn't quite know how to read it. But I just have to tell you, can I tell you one story from Congo? This is totally apolitical. So we were dealing with, we were trying to get help integration of the army, because there were all sorts of different groups who needed to be working side by side and were actually shooting each other. So I'm interpreting, and to eat a meal while you're interpreting, just try it, guys. It is really hard because person A speaks and you have to translate, and then he starts eating while the other person B answers that you have to. So I was given a miraculous time to have lunch by myself. So I go and sit at this table. There's only one other guy. I say, so, hi, can I sit here? Oh, yeah. And who are you with? Oh, I'm with the Mai Mai. So I said, oh, well, there's, dozens of, which group of the Mai Mai? Says, oh, I'm with the Kafufu. Oh, so how are they different? What makes you distinctive? So he goes, well, we fight naked. So I go, as anyone who knows me, it's very rare that I'm lost for words. I swear I didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. And I was thinking, eating my goat and thinking, do you know what? Maybe if the whole world was required to fight naked, there'd be fewer wars. So just think about it. This could be a whole conflict resolution tool.
I think you should take that to the UN. Come on.
Exactly.
This could be a really good outworking from these podcasts. I think we could do a whole podcast. I mean, that was really meaty, beautiful, sort of undercover, sort of behind the scenes diplomatic work, which would warrant a podcast by itself. I'm sure there's loads of stories that you actually aren't allowed to tell. We're really running out of time. Where did Baby Queen fit into your story?
Oh, so as I said, every day at Bravo, we would have a time of sharing for an hour. And one day I had a visitor. I often had visitors, including Simon, often. And this visitor told a very poignant story about her own walk out of deep immorality into healing. And a week later, I discovered that one of my girls, that same day, in her pocket was an abortion kit. And she was all set to abort the baby in her womb. And she heard that story and she believed that God would provide for her and for her baby. And that baby was born and her name was Queen. And she's always been a really special baby because she shouldn't have been. I mean, she almost wasn't. I can never look at her or think of her without God is so extraordinary, the way what he does to, when he pulls out the stops to have someone on this earth. And he does that for all of us in different ways. Every single person is totally wanted and totally arranged by him.
That's right.
Even if the circumstances look pretty weird and undesirable, if you want.
Yeah. No one beyond the pale. No one listening beyond the pale, and no one on the planet. Freddie was beyond the. No, he wasn't beyond the pale, and that you being called, Mbabazi, compassion, that being your name and who you are, your identity, that has sometimes had mixed results, hasn't it? Like, I mean, I think of you getting me into trouble. I think of that time when you rang me up and said, Simon, there's this guy I want you to meet. He's anyway, you didn't give me much information. Turns out he was a pastor, but a diamond smuggler, and he'd just been released from prison. And so we connected at this cafe, and I'm talking to him thinking, why am I here? I mean, this is all very interesting. And then from behind him, I see a friend of mine walking towards him, very purposeful, and he's coming up to us. I'm like, what's going on? And then he jumped on the Kenyan pastor, grabbed him, wrestled him to the ground, and said, police! And he was doing a citizen's arrest. I said, what the heck is going on? Alli, what have you got me into? It cost me the friendship with that pastor. I mean, it turns out that it was a friend of his who's the guy had stolen the diamond off. I mean, it's all very messy. And then you got me visiting in prison. You got me visiting a guy on death row, and that went a bit sort of pear-shaped. But it never a dull moment with you. Prison stuff, anything as we come into land? Any stories you want to share from Himba prison?
Well, just a quickie. I could tell you 8 billion, but just one day. So there's a bit of a coup d'etat going on. I think it was 2015. And of course, nobody's visiting the prison because no one's going anywhere. Everyone is just trying to keep their head down from the bullets. And I get a call from the prison from actually a phone I smuggled in myself, so serves me right. Shh, don't tell. And the guy says, we need charcoal. Oh, well, that's too bad. There's a war zone all around the prison. Well, bring us charcoal. There's a major war going. I have to go through, past a whole. Just bring us charcoal. There's people starving in prison. Okay, load up the truck with charcoal. Drive, honestly, the gauntlet through a war zone. And I get there. I'm shaking. I'm praising God. Well, I'm saying that. I was probably just shaking more than praising, but I was just very grateful to be alive. Delivered the charcoal, had a long chat, particularly long, because I wasn't really excited about leaving and going back through the war zone. Anyway, just to cut, my stories are all long, just a long story short, I drive back, and about probably a year later, I find that one of the girls I'm training in sewing was actually there shooting at the time that I was driving through. Anyway, so it was perfectly fine, and God protected me. And yeah,
we could talk, and sometimes people exaggerate, but I think you could easily fill 10 podcasts of just riveting stories, because I know we're not covering a whole load of stuff, which is frustrating to me. I don't want people to miss out on some sort of real Alli pearls of wisdom that have come through. We've talked some funny stories, but some really tough times as well. And I guess also, as we've shared these stories, people, they're undeniably fascinating, but they're so far removed from most listeners' realities. I wonder if, what sort of stuff would you want to convey from lessons learned and the faithfulness of God? Just take it away for the last few minutes on that level.
Ooh, obviously, the fact I've reached 67 after living in quite a few war zones means he's pretty faithful. You know what? I think one of the best things about him is he's a now God. He's not a then God. He's not I've got to whip up something. I've got to be something different or do something. Like right now, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, he's right there for you. He's right there for us. And our whole lives are actually a series of nows. And what the devil tries to do is say, oh, you're never going to pull out of, oh, you'll never be good enough, or, oh. And he tries to block the simple fact that actually it's just about, it's you and God and now. And if we like stretch out to him for each now, we'll suddenly find, whoa, actually, yeah, there he is. He did come through for me, and I can do it with him. And that's a pretty kindergarten thing to say, but I think sometimes we try and be so PhD that we forget the kindergarten, and we panic our way out of faith. But I read something the other day in a Bill Bryson book, and it said, an average-sized adult will contain no less than, it's a certain number, 7 times 10 to the power of 18 joules. A joule is an energy measure of potential energy, enough to explode with the force of 30 very large hydrogen bombs. That is actually who you are. And for those of you who have received Christ, Christ is in us. The God creator of the universe is in Christ. And if you don't like holy stuff, go for the science. 30 large hydrogen bombs, that is we have the most extraordinary potential. So please, lovely people, just say, Lord, or power that I don't quite get yet, reveal who I am as well as who you are. I think maybe that's what I'd say.
Wow, Ali, that is a good, serious note to end on, a profound moment to end on. And now all of us, we leave you, we picture you with those silly cockerels squawking away, and with a fan whirring and a sweaty humidity in the north of Thailand, of Cambodia, and with your imminent move, COVID permitting, into the actual jungle, into a house that will be built for you just on what they slats, and just for a couple of £100 again. I mean, it's just such a different life. We live on such a different world, and yet you're just trying to bring hope and light and be part of that translation work to be able to give access to this precious but underprivileged, rejected bunch of Kevet people group, access to the good news in Jesus. So I find it very challenging, very humbling. So we wish you God's blessing in that.
I just want to add something about our friendship. One of the sweet things about it was I was able to do sort of subversive babysitting quite regularly. And on one subversive babysitting evening, I picked out a book by Dallas Willard called Divine Conspiracy. And there was a sentence from that I just grabbed, and it said, the full price for the full power. And of course, that's what Jesus did. And I'm not saying we're Jesus, but I just want to say, when I hear that sentence, it challenges me. And I think of Simon, because if you want to really be walking and bearing fruit, there is a price to pay. So I just throw that at anyone to just maybe meditate on it, the full price for the full power. And thank you, Simon, because you have challenged me so often, sometimes making me a bit depressed that I'm not a Simon, but God, one is more than enough to cope with. So yeah, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Appreciate that. Guys, if any of you want to be in touch with Ali to encourage her, you could write to me. simongilbo.com is my various social media platforms. You could get in touch. If you've enjoyed today, which I presume you have, it's been superb, then I'd love it if you subscribe to our podcast that's Inspired with Simon Gilbert. I'd love it if you gave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That'll all be helpful. Be in touch if you like. Next week, we've got another stunning visitor. I'm loving sharing my friends with you. So see you next week. And in the meantime, goodbye from Ali.
Thank you, dear Simon. Really precious friendship and a powerful friendship. Really bless you.
Yeah, and goodbye from me, everybody. Toodaloo.